I've covered a lot of new mechanics in Rocket League, and the one thing I've found is that there's always more to them than meets the eye. And maybe that's the case with this clip, which surfaced on Twitter this week. What you're watching now is a recent discovery by popular pro player Breezy, who many will know as the creator of the Breezy Flick. Now in this video we're going to answer a couple questions you're probably asking yourself. Firstly, is it actually a new mechanic? Secondly, is it actually useful or learnable? And thirdly, does it actually deserve a unique name for itself? Well, first, let's start with whether it's actually new or not. To explain this, we have to go back a bit. Our story begins in March 2019, when this clip surfaced on Twitter. This is one of the earliest examples of what is known as a wall pogo. It is essentially the same as a normal pogo, except you're doing it on the wall. Now this is probably not the first example of this ever in the game, but it's probably one of the earliest examples I could find which relate to our new mechanic. As you can see in the mechanic that Breezy has created, the car pogos in the exact same way as this original clip I found. From this clip onwards, pogos would evolve dramatically, eventually being popularized by a pro player called Dark, who is extremely well known for using these in 1v1 show matches and comp. But the only problem with all these clips is that the pogo itself isn't launching the ball away. They are simply using a pogo in order to reach the ball, as an example. Unlike our original clip, which is using it to actually launch the ball. So are there any examples of this anywhere? Well, if we fast forward to November 2020, this clip surfaced on Twitter. And later that month, this would also surface. Now, although not obvious, the link between these two mechanics is that they're using a pogo to piff the ball away from them. But how does this relate to our new mechanic? Well, as you can see, our new mechanic bounces off the wall to piff the ball away from them, much like these two clips. In fact, after Breezy posted about this new mechanic, an example was posted using Taz, otherwise known as Tool Assisted Superplay, which was able to replicate a similar thing on the sidewall. The common link between all these clips is that they're using a pogo either to reach the ball or piff the ball away, which the latter can be seen in our new mechanic. So I think we can safely establish that this isn't necessarily an original mechanic. However, it could still be extremely important, and this lies in whether it's actually useful or not. So is it? Well, for a start, Breezy in the original post stated that this mechanic was meant to be useful for comp, and the clips that he does provide do utilize the mechanic in a way which could be used in an actual game. However, the main problem is that there are no clips of this being used in game, until now. This is a clip of me actually using it in a competitive game, and while it wasn't awfully useful in this scenario, one thing I will point out is that I had only done 15 minutes of training with this mechanic before that clip, so I think with a bit of practice, this mechanic can definitely be used within an actual game. As to how useful it actually will be, that's honestly up to debate. The next thing to answer is whether it's actually learnable, and as I've just demonstrated, it's actually not hard to learn. It does require a very specific set of circumstances to do it, but after only 15 minutes of training, I was able to get clips that resemble the original mechanic. In fact, I was able to get this mechanic more consistent than say something like a Cuxa pinch, which is something that Breezy also points out in his original post. And I'm only ranked around GC2, so this is definitely accessible for a lot of people. But the final question we have to answer is whether this mechanic deserves a unique name for itself. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll know that this can be a very touchy subject in the Rocket League community. But let's outline some possibilities, even if it doesn't end up getting a unique name for itself. A common one that's been floating around is the Breezy Pop, which is an okay name, but I don't necessarily think it describes the mechanic that well. However, in my personal opinion, I think this should be called a sidewall pogo. And this is because, as I've shown earlier, the mechanic originates from a sidewall pogo. Other people have also mentioned the idea of calling it bonk, but that name actually applies to a previous mechanic which I discussed in another video of mine, so that wouldn't work in this scenario. And while these are only a few options, it's honestly up to you to decide as to what you think this should be named. But now it's time to answer the $1 million question. Is this new or is it not? Well, as we've discussed, it is not necessarily an original mechanic, and it's a slight variation of a sidewall pogo. However, even that is not necessarily original. It does have a huge amount of potential in game, especially in a competitive environment, and is also relatively easy to learn. So where does this place the Breezy Pop? Well, in my personal opinion, it's probably not a new mechanic, but I don't necessarily think that's important. As Breezy said himself, he didn't necessarily think it was either. I think what's important about this mechanic is that even today, 8 years after Rocket League was released, there is still innovation happening in the game, and something like this can actually be used properly in a real game, and that in itself is quite amazing. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you like this type of content and you want to see more like it, feel free to like and subscribe, and also check out my community Discord where you get all the latest updates on my content and can hang out with the rest of the community. This is Moldy Shoe. Thanks for watching.